Well, I got my notes, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Pepsi, check. Thick skin, check. Let's go. Hey, welcome to Golden Blue Dude, everybody. If you're a college football fan, might as well hit the like and subscribe button because that's all we do over here. Go check out our Patreon page. We call our Patreons the shot callers because that's exactly what they do around here. And when the regular season gets here, our Patreons will get to decide which game we'll live stream, and you'll get to watch with Golden Blue Dude. And the score prediction contest will be coming back. Every week I pick out a game and my Patreons guess the score, and whoever comes closest to the score wins $20 every single week, and you can win as many times as you want. The higher the Patreon, the more guesses you get per week. Another video on the 4th of July, so once again, happy 4th of July to everybody out there. Hope you have a happy and safe 4th of July. Do your patriotic duty and either set off fireworks or watch fireworks. I fall under the setting off fireworks. I'm going to see if I can make a video out of it and see how that works out. But today, we're still talking about conference realignment. We're talking about the Big 12 survival, what they need to do to survive this conference realignment, and what it would look like if they do the steps that I'm providing or that I'm suggesting. I think the Big 12 should go to 24 teams. It's a theory, it's a thought that the ultimate goal of the Big 10 and the SEC is to get to 24 teams and split off. Well, if the Big 12 were to stretch themselves to 24 teams, they'd have an argument for the Big 10 and the SEC saying, hold on, look at our conference. We need to be in there too. We have way too many big-time brands and big-time names to be left out. You need to include the Big 12. So this is how the Big 12 could survive all this and split off with the Big 10 and the SEC. But you got to get to 24 teams if you want this to happen. So current members plus the 4 newbies: West Virginia, UCF, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Houston, Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, and BYU. 12 members, but they need to add 12 more. Well, we already know that they're already talking to Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State. That gets you to 16. How do we get to 24? Well, Washington and Oregon, they are on the board for the Big 10, but the Big 10 really wants Notre Dame, and I think they're willing to bring in Stanford in order to entice Notre Dame, so that would actually leave Washington and Oregon out of it. Big 12, you better go in and scoop them up. So that brings you up to 18. We still need to get to 24, so that's when you turn your attention to the ACC. You're probably not going to get the biggest brands like the North Carolina, the Clemson, the Florida State, the biggest brands that the SEC are going to get. But there's some big-time leftovers that you could get that could strengthen the Big 12. And you need to beat the Big 10 to the punch because some of these brands, I guarantee you, the Big 10 is interested in. But I think the Big 12 could go after Louisville. Louisville's kind of in the middle. I don't think the Big 10 really wants Louisville. I'm not really sure if the SEC is interested in Louisville, so that would be a pretty good pickup for the Big 12. There's Pitt. A lot of Pitt fans think that the Big 10 does want them because they are AAU, but from what I'm hearing, Penn State does not want Pitt in the Big 10, so they could be left out. That would be a big get for the Big 12 because West Virginia's already in there, and you'd be adding Louisville. So go in there and get Pitt. And there's Georgia Tech. I don't think Georgia Tech's going to get a bid from the Big 10 or the SEC. I think Georgia would most definitely block the Yellow Jackets from getting in. So go in and swoop them up. Then Miami, they're missing the first round cut from what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the SEC wants Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and Virginia. So the Big 12 needs to be proactive and not wait on the Big 10 to make its decision or the next round for the SEC. Go in and swoop up the Hurricanes. That's a big brand. That's a big get. You already have UCF in there, so at least they have a partner. Then there's Wake Forest and Duke. And no, I don't think the Big 10 or the SEC is even interested in either of those two unless there's a team that they're wanting that says, hey, we want Duke or Wake Forest as a travel partner. But I don't think that's going to happen. No, not even for North Carolina. So go in and swoop in Wake Forest and Duke. Not the biggest of brands in football, but it does get you to 24. So it might be out of necessity that you get those two brands. Now, the interesting thing is the pods. This is super tricky. I'm open to any suggestions because I'm not 100% pleased with what I came up with. So if you can come up with something better, by all means, leave it in the comments section. I'm most definitely interested in what you have to say about this. This is the best that I could do, but maybe you can do even better. I didn't really get too cute with the pod names. I just basically went by geography and direction. So if you have any suggestions as far as naming the pods, I'm open to that as well because this is very generic. So for the Big 12, 4 pods consisting of 6 teams. That's basically a mini division because if you look at conferences now, usually they consist of 2 divisions, either 7 teams or 6 teams apiece. So it's basically a division in and of its own right. But it's still pods because there's 4 of them. So the first pod is going to be the East pod. And the tricky thing is West Virginia and Pitt. I did have to split them up because of geography. You'll see whenever I'm done with this. But you could still preserve the Backyard Brawl as one of the games that still must be played every single year. Because your pod would only make up 5 conference games. If you go to an 8 or a 9 conference set as far as games played, then you still have 3 or 4 open spots and you can preserve rivalries out of another pod if necessary. So I think that's what you have to do with Pitt and West Virginia. And you'll see once I explain this. I have UCF, Miami, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Duke, and West Virginia. I think all of those universities were the closest together on the east side of the Big 12. I think it makes travel a little bit easier. And like I said, if there's any rivalries outside the pod, you can preserve that with the 3 or 4 remaining conference games available left on the schedule. So there's your East pod, and I really like it. You keep the Florida teams together. Georgia Tech doesn't have too much travel. West Virginia really doesn't have that much travel. I mean, they're the most northern team, and they would have to go to UCF and Miami, but that's still just 1 or 2 games a year. So I really like this. I think the travel's not all that bad, and these teams can be familiar with each other. And of course, you're keeping the 2 Florida teams together. That absolutely makes sense, of course. And there's the West pod. You'd have Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, BYU, and Oklahoma State. The West was difficult as well because you still have Arizona and Arizona State. I thought about putting them in the West as well, but then you'd split up some teams that wouldn't make any sense, and you'd kind of have a hole in the West where some of the teams that were supposed to be in the West would be in the Central, and that wouldn't make any sense either. So I stuck with this, and I think it makes the most sense. And you'll see, I think Arizona and Arizona State fits in better in the pod that I came up with than the West. Of course, you're preserving Utah, BYU, that's a great rivalry. Washington, Oregon, that's a great rivalry. And you're keeping the former Pac-12 members together, excluding Arizona and Arizona State. So Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, all would be in the same pod. I think that makes sense. On to the South, and this is where I have Arizona and Arizona State. Here's what the South pod looks like. Arizona, Arizona State, Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, and Houston. So basically you'd have the 2 Arizona schools and the 4 Texas schools, and that's the most southern part of the Big 12 if you don't count the East. So I think the name makes sense. I think the pod makes sense. You're preserving Arizona, Arizona State. You're preserving all the Texas schools, and the travel makes sense. Any of the Texas schools that still want to play Oklahoma State on a yearly basis, you can do that with one of your 3 or 4 remaining conference games. So I like that pod as well. That is the South pod. And finally, the North pod. This is the northern part of the Big 12. You got Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Louisville, Cincinnati, and Pitt. I like this. You're keeping Kansas, Kansas State, and Iowa State together. And you're also keeping Louisville, Cincinnati, and Pitt. So I think that's a nice little bunch. Louisville and Cincinnati, that could be a good rivalry. Of course, Louisville and Pitt, that's already a good rivalry. And Pitt and Cincinnati, that could be a good rivalry. And of course, you could preserve any other out-of-pod rivalries by making it one of the other conference games. Remember, you still got 3 or 4 conference games you can play with. So Pitt, West Virginia, that's a no-brainer. That has to happen every year. Louisville, West Virginia, that might be a game where they preserve every year. Has to be played. And then Cincinnati and West Virginia. I mean, they could preserve that for every year, or they can make that an every other year type of deal because that's not the biggest rivalry. But you definitely want to preserve West Virginia and Louisville, West Virginia and Pitt. So if there's another arrangement with these pods that makes more sense to you, by all means, let me know in the comments. Same with the name of the pods. I went generic and just went by geography and direction. So y'all let me know in the comments section what you think about the Big 12 going to 24 and what you think about the pods. What teams would you have where and how would you name the pods? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.